Hey, good morning. It's a wonderful day in the neighborhood. For those of you who are joining us online and wondering, it is a balmy 31 degrees here in Northwest Florida. We're freezing to death. Well, some people are not. So it's good to see everyone this morning. And we're continuing our lessons in Psalms. And I have a couple of slides. So we have an interesting topic this morning. You know? All right, so we have a test this morning. Oh, you'll get this one all right. So, what do we know about lions and tigers and bears? What's the next part? Oh my, somebody knew it. All right, all right. How about dogs and cats and hamsters? Anything up there you don't know about? Mice and rats and spiders and cockroaches, sharks and whales and goldfish. Anybody have a goldfish? I had a goldfish growing up. The cat ate it. Cars, trucks, airplanes. We know a lot about a lot of things, don't we? And I look around in here and I would say the accumulated knowledge in this room for a vast array of subjects would probably simply amaze you what people in here actually know. Even more interesting is what people know and don't claim to know. But that's okay. That's okay. So, what do we know about each other? Probably not as much as we ought to. You know? Now, we may know a little bit about somebody. In some cases, we might know a lot about people. But we don't know it all. We just don't know it all. So this morning, I want to know what that thing is. I found this on the internet. And Paul Tribble will tell you that if it is on the internet, it is unquestionably, absolutely, 100% true. It doesn't look real, but it was on the internet. I don't know. I mean, it just looks contrived to me. And I don't know what it is. Here's another picture. Now, which one of those pictures looks like it's real? You know? Neither one of them do they. You know, what is it? Okay. It's a real thing. It's a Venezuelan poodle moth. Now, I know that Brian's got his phone up there right now. He's going to Google this thing. But I am not going to tell you how to spell Venezuelan, so some of you will be challenged trying to find out what the Venezuelan poodle moth is all about. But it is a Venezuelan poodle moth, and apparently it's a real thing. I'm not so sure about that first picture. I know the second one is absolutely true because I found a confirmation on the internet that that picture was true. So what can you say? What can you say? There's a lot of things we don't know about. So we're going to be in Psalms 139. So if you've got your Bible, your iPad, your machine of some description that you can turn to Psalms 139, we're going to spend the entire class in there. Now, I don't have as many slides as I typically have, and I might finish early, warning to the streaming crew. But when I'm done, I'm done. I won't bring it up. There's liable to be tons of discussion because you see how much discussion was generated over the Venezuelan poodle moth. All right, so what do we know about Psalms 139? Well, first of all, it's a Psalm of David, a Davidic psalm. This is the second in a series of 8 psalms toward the end of Psalms. They're all written by David. Okay, so some of the commentators I read said, oh, well, this was early in David's life after the Philistines had caused him a great deal of difficulty and were, pushing on him hard. Some people say, well, this is later in his life. He was looking back over his life and thinking about the things he had experienced. But very possibly this was a time that the Israelites were being challenged, and maybe even some of them were not very happy. But it looks like it probably, if we read it, and we're going to read it, it kind of addresses David's needs and those of the Israelites. So, in that form, it's interesting. So, let's go to work. The preceding psalm, remember how I told you that some of these psalms tie to each other? And, you'll read one and then you'll find something else that meets. Well, in the preceding psalms, which, just so you know, to be totally honest, it is Psalms 138. So, if you had any doubt about that. David talks about God's and that he's faithful to his promises, that he does what he says, and he's firmly convinced of that. He's confident that God will keep his future promises. God's kept his promises so far. I don't see any reason that he won't keep his future promises. I think he's going to do that. David's concerned about his personal security. There were a lot of times in David's life he wasn't real sure what was going to happen next. But David was very sure that God was going to take care of him, that in spite of whatever happened, God would take care of him. But David was also convinced that in time, the world would come to see God for who or what he really was, that they would see God's power and majesty, and they would understand that there were things that they had to do in order to please God. Now, he was really convinced of that. So let's get into Psalm 139. All right, there are 4 sections in this psalm of 6 verses each. We talk about the symmetry and the poetry that makes up psalms. Each of those sections is called a strophe. That's a Greek word. So somebody later on said that. It also could be called a meditation, perhaps. Each one of those sections is free verse. In other words, there's not a set number of words, even in the Hebrew, because I went and checked. It's just a loose connection. And so each of those sections is kind of a progression. And we'll see as we read through there and we talk about that, how these things kind of interrelate. But one thing that God does, and you're going to see this, is David says, God, I want you to look at me completely. I want you to put me under the magnifying glass, and I want you to examine me thoroughly. Now, no show of hands here, but who of us would like to have God examine us thoroughly? I'm not real happy when I see the doctor once a year. This is some serious stuff. All right, let's get to work here. Psalms 139, verses 1 through 6. David says, Lord, you have searched me and known me. I'm using the Christian Standard Bible for my verses today. Brian used them last week, and I think I like those. So it says, Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I stand up. You understand my thoughts from far away. David's saying, God, you know about me. You know about me. God is omniscient. We don't use those words a lot, but he knows everything about David, and David knows he knows everything about him. He says, you observe my travels and my rest. You are aware of all my ways. David, he says, God, you took the Brillo pad and you have just scoured away all of the things in my life, and you know every little bit about me. Everything. You know what I'm thinking about. You know what I thought about. You know what I'm going to think about. These are things that you know about me. David's acknowledging that God has all knowledge. It's interesting. Before a word is on my tongue, you know all about it, Lord. Think about that. David's saying, even before I form a phrase, even before I say a word, even before I do anything, you know about it. David says, before that word leaves my mouth, you know what it is. You know what it is. We're told that the tongue can be a pretty dangerous thing, aren't we? And think about, I have to be honest here. I'm not real happy on Highway 98 with some of the people that share the road with me. As a matter of fact, most of them, I don't know where they learned to drive. And I'm not real complimentary of some of those drivers. I will frequently scold them. It doesn't seem to make any difference, though. They still drive awfully. And I don't know. But David says, before I even say it, you know what it is. You know what I'm going to say before I even say it. If we honestly believe that, we really would think 2 or 3 times before we said something. But just to understand that, just the process of thinking about it, well, he already knows. So, be careful. A lot of times I wonder about people that I hear talking, and the choice of vocabulary sometimes is I don't regard very well. But if they really thought, Jesus hears me, he knows, maybe it wouldn't make a difference. I don't know. Verse 5 says, you have encircled me, you have placed your hand on me. He says, this wondrous knowledge is beyond me. It is lofty. I am unable to reach it. I read this a couple times, and this idea, I'm not sure if David felt like he was being confined or constrained by God. He probably did to a certain extent believe that. He probably thought, well, this is, it's sometimes it's, do you even have claustrophobia? I mean, this is not something I've ever suffered with, but I mean, I understand that you get into a confined space and it becomes difficult to breathe, and you feel like everything is closing in on you, and the longer you're in that smaller space, the worse you feel. You feel like, just everything's coming down on you. I don't know if that's what David is saying here, or if he's just saying that I appreciate that your protective hand is on me, that, but what he says is this thing, it's beyond understanding. That's what this wondrous knowledge, it's I don't understand it. It's amazing to me. It's almost, David said, this is just more than I can comprehend. This is more than I can really, understand. It's challenging. It's deep. All of these things kind of roll in, and David's saying, you know everything, God. I don't know. I'm not going to get away with nothing here. And so, where do you go? So, comments on the first 6 verses? I knew there would be dozens. Okay, moving on. Second section, Psalms 139, 7 through 12. Where can I go to escape your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? Does David want to escape God's grip? I don't know. Maybe, or maybe it's an acknowledgement. Maybe those are rhetorical questions. Maybe really they're just how David shows that no matter how hard I try, I cannot escape your presence. I can't escape your presence. If I go up to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. Now, those are hypothetical places that David might go, but the idea is from here to here, here to here, here to here, no matter where I go, I can't escape your presence. You are there. David didn't use the specific word for Sheol, which is hell, but the sense is the same, because even in hell, God will be present. Because God is everywhere. So he's there. There's no place that God cannot be. We don't really think about that sometimes, but all of these things exist because God allows them to, or he wills them to. And that's something that I think is often challenging to us today. How do we process this idea that God just is simply everywhere, and because he's everywhere, he's embedded in our lives? I wonder, even in the lower depths of Sheol, of hell, God's presence will still radiate love. Now, the occupants might not necessarily enjoy it, but it's there nonetheless. But it's part of God's righteous judgment. He said, if I fly on the wings of the dawn and settle down on the western horizon. Now, we don't think a lot about that, but let's talk about this for a minute. This wings of dawn to the, that's kind of a metaphor for the speed of light. In other words, nothing can outrun you. I can't outrun you. Nobody can outrun you. You cannot outrun God. They used to say that the bad guys couldn't outrun the police radios. You know, they no matter what happened, you couldn't outrun that radio. Well, that radio is nothing compared to what God's capable of. And so that is a challenge that we need to think about. You know, we cannot outrun God. He says, even there, your hand will lead me, your right hand will hold on to me. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light around me will be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night shines like day. Darkness and not light are alike to you. You know, the dark can be a scary place. If you read throughout history, men are more scared of the dark, the unknown, what they can't see. You know, if it's in the light, well, you know, we might have a fighting chance. We might actually be able to deal with something that we can see. But if it's in the dark, you know, what about the monsters under the bed? What do you do about those, you know? I put a board around the bottom of my bed, you know, just to make sure they can't get out. Just so you know, I have a plan. But dark's always been a scary thing. God is omnipresent. He's everywhere. He does not shirk from the dark. As a matter of fact, David says, you know, there's no difference between dark and light. To you, to God, it's all the same. It can be as black can be. I mean, I've been in places where it's so dark you can't see your hand in front of your face. God would have no issues there. And David knows that. And he says, you know, God, I know that doesn't matter at all, whether it's light or dark, no matter where I am, no matter how fast I can move, you are there. You are there. And that's something that is still as powerful today as it was for David. All right, this is a really challenging section. This is what's going to get us banned. I want you to think about some of this stuff this morning. Verse 13 says, for it was you who created my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I will praise you because I have been remarkably and wondrously made. There's that word wondrous again. Your works are wondrous, and I know this very well. This passage, for me, is somewhat concerning. If you miss these 6 verses, you're going to be very disappointed, because this talks about conception, gestation, what follows. And he says, your works are wondrous. They're beyond the capability of man. And we'll talk about that. But God cares for children in the womb. And that is very, very important, because this is not a thing. This is not it. This is a children, a person in the womb. God's concern for life begins at conception. So what does that mean? That means that we have a responsibility as God's people to also know, and care about children in the womb. David says, my bones were not hidden from you when I was made in secret, when I was formed in the depths of the earth. That phrase basically talks about this idea of the depths of the earth. There is another term for it, and I've got a note. I have to go back and look at it. Some of the versions say the lowest parts of the earth. Basically, what the term means is that it's a mysterious, unseen place. And the comment that I have basically is that, David understood. He understood the importance of life from conception. He understood, that it was beyond human understanding. David?
Says, you watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion, as I was woven together in the dark of the womb.
So David read a passage from the New Living Translation. When you think about this understanding, this concept, and the number of translations that we've been through, there's still one thing that shines through all of that, and that is, to God, life starts at conception. And how you can turn it into anything else is totally beyond me. And David understood that. Your eyes saw me when I was formless. All my days are written in your book and planned before a single one of them began. Absolutely.
The first part. Other places in Psalms where it talks about the heavens declare the glory of God and all of that. I think there's a bit of that here. The wonder of the human body declares the glory of God as well, the eye and the ear. It's amazing. And to me, that's another.
David's saying that the places in Psalms that talk about the wonders of God and the heavens and earth, this is just another confirms God's workings. We may know about a process, and we think we know a lot of different things, but I'm going to tell you that magic that occurs, we cannot duplicate. Oh, we've tried. We tried to do all these kinds of things. We try to fiddle with eggs and fertilization, and we try to mess with DNA and all these. You know what? We still can't make something out of nothing. We can't do it. And it doesn't matter how hard we try. And everything that we try to duplicate this process, and we try to, we can make this happen. It's like Moses and Aaron, and we can turn our staffs into serpents, and we can do, there is only so much magic we can do. And then there's a point that comes that we can't do that anymore. We can't duplicate that. We can't make that happen. We cannot create something from nothing, and anything we try to make, we usually mess it up. He says, God, how precious your thoughts are to me, how vast their sum is. He says, if I counted them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. He says, when I wake up, I'm still with you. God's perfect knowledge did not only extend to the past, but also before David was born, to the future. It says God knew David's days as if they'd already been written in a book. God told Jeremiah, I know the plans I have for you. I know. I think David, he says, I really appreciate being in God's thoughts. Do we really appreciate being in God's thoughts? And this image, of how often God thinks of us? It's amazing. You know? Now, if we didn't live on the beach, this idea of the grains of sand might be a little challenging, but we know about that sand out there on the beach. You know? Well, that sand is just, it's uncountable. I've been in the desert, and you can't do much with that sand either. You can't count that stuff. But God's thoughts, His ideas, His knowledge surpasses all of that. We can't do it. We can't make it work. You know? We cannot outthink God as much as we try, as much as we think, oh, we got it all figured out. Turn around and find out that we don't know anything in comparison to what God knows. And we just don't. I mean, there are so many things in this world we don't know about, let alone the thoughts that are in God's head. It's hard. You know, it's not hard for God, but it's hard for us. And we got to kind of put that into perspective. It's important for us to understand, as Christians today, what God's plans are for us. We need to really believe that. We need to really understand that and understand how important it is that we give God the reverence and awe He deserves. And that's what David's saying. You know? Now this last section, now this is going to be interesting. It's interesting to me because God's just talked about how wonderful everything is and how, you know everything about me. David says, you know it all. You know everything about me. You appreciate life even when it's still in the womb. And then all of a sudden in verse 19 he says, God, if you would only kill the wicked. You bloodthirsty men, stay away from me. I don't know, maybe David's a little bit in trouble. Maybe he's thinking, I've got some challenges. I think that, I think a couple things, first of all. I think that David says, God, you need to slay these wicked people around me. You need to get rid of them. They're a horrible distraction to me. They're challenging. They don't love you. They don't appreciate you. They are wicked men. You should get rid of them. Just get rid of them. And this bloodthirsty man, David sees a danger in associating with bad company. Sometimes it's not so much as who we are, but who we are with. And we forget that. Lord, don't I hate those who hate you and detest those who rebel against you? David's identifying with God here. He's saying, you hate them, therefore I hate them. David, he almost seems to be at a loss for words. He is so concerned about bad company and the wicked people around him. Sometimes I might say in jest, there's nothing like a good smiting, to set an example. This happened in the Old Testament. There was some smiting going on, and it got people's attention. They saw it firsthand. They knew it. They were, had to be on their minds. They did forget. Over time, people forget. A little regular smiting might be productive. He says, I hate them with an extreme hatred. I consider them my enemies. These are some people that David's saying, these are some awful people. I don't like them. You don't like them. We don't like them. Let's do something about it. Maybe. You know, what do? You know, I grew up, and you don't hate people. You don't hate people. That's just not something you do. And then you find a passage like this, and it colors that teaching to a certain extent. You know, we see it. Jeff?
In all of the Psalms, they are expressions of the writer's emotions. And that it's sometimes dangerous to take their outpouring of emotions as a teaching of do likewise. Here's a case of a man, David, who had more enemies, more people seeking his life, more people contriving against him, constantly worried about his throne, constantly worried about even his survival. That's his perspective from which he's speaking. And so when I read this, I don't think, oh, it's all right. I'm going to pray tonight, you know, for all the people that I think are bad people around me, which is, by the way, a lot of people, that they might just die. God, please kill them. I don't think that's what we're going to take from it. But it does teach me that first of all, those people are enemies of God. I ought to feel like God does. However, not place myself in the position of God. And so to try to wrap this up, it's longer than I expected. As I look at this, I would say, yes, David is someone who is reacting here. But the teaching that God's enemies are our enemies is true. And then Jesus says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And I will take what Jesus said in this particular instance above what David says.
So Jeff talks about this idea of you know, we're not the ones judging. It's not up to us to do this. And David is not even saying that here. He's calling on God to do this. He's not saying, God, empower me to go out and kill all these people. He's not saying that. He's not saying, I want to do all this. He's saying, you know, these are bad, truly bad people, God, and if you did away with them, it would be okay with me. But like Jeff says, Jesus says, love your enemies. You know, pray for them, which will heap coals on their head. And David doesn't contradict this, but like Jeff pointed out, David's comments are born out of experience. He has been in some really tough situations in his life. From the time he was a very young man until he was older, David was constantly challenged by people around him, even his own family. Even his own family. And so I think David is just saying, God, these people are awful. Can't you get rid of them? Can't you, you know, ease that burden for me? And so, yeah. You know, he says, search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my concerns. He's saying, you know how I feel, God. You know I support you 100%. He says, see if there is any offensive way in me. Lead me in the everlasting way. These are strong words. I mean, let's face it. And David, he doesn't, you know, as Jeff correctly pointed out, there's a lot of emotion in Psalms. A lot of emotion. Probably more in Psalms than there is anywhere else in the Bible. But it's born out of the experience of the psalmist. We've seen some of this awful stuff. We've seen some of this bad stuff. It's tough. It's hard. It's hard for us sometimes. You know. But David ends this psalm and he says, lead me in the everlasting way. David's destination, the everlasting way. You know, trusting God, trusting in His complete knowledge, complete presence. David believed that would bring him everlasting life. You know, this last couple of verses is really a prayer of sorts. And he's saying that, you know, all of these things, they have one objective, and that is the everlasting life. You know, so the psalm kind of ends like it begins. David calling for God to examine him, and in spite of David's past. David made a lot of mistakes. We make a lot of mistakes. We're not any different. You know? It's not just that God knows everything. He knows me, just like He knew David. It's not like God's everywhere. He's everywhere with me. Bring this home. He's everywhere with me. It's not just that God created everything. He created me. He created me. Finally, what do we know about anything? Not as much as God. Not as much as God. We need to trust God, love God, appreciate the things that God has done for us, because I'm going to tell you, the way everlasting is where we want to go. It's that simple. That's all I've got for you this morning. I appreciate your attention so much, and thank you so much for being here this morning.